Hello, Elwood City Limits listeners, and now, viewers. Will Young here with a special piece of Elwood City Limits content for you as we get closer to wrapping up the Arthur series on our podcast. Now, one thing that we've gotten emails and questions about for a couple of years has to do with a special case in the history of the Arthur show. In later seasons, we've seen what my co-host, Lucas Mancini, and I call remixes of past episodes. Essentially, these episodes take the concept or story of an older Arthur episode and shake it up a bit by changing the main character or maybe a plot detail or two. For a show as long-lived as Arthur was, we've never had any problem with this idea inherently, and it's interesting to see when you've watched the series the whole way through, as we are about to. However, one time in the history of the show, an older episode was not remixed, but straight up remade. I'm talking about The Great MacGrady, an episode that originally aired in October 2009 as part of Arthur Season 13. In case you aren't familiar, or just need a reminder, this is a special double episode of the show, where it's revealed that Lakewood Elementary cafeteria lady, Mrs. MacGrady, who is a longtime minor character on the show, is battling cancer. The episode deals with the reaction of several kids to this news, especially Francine's reaction, and thankfully ends on a happy note. It's a notable episode in the show for the themes it tackles, and, as usual, it handles them with care and dignity. I'd call it one of the best Arthur episodes in the whole series, because it's emblematic of just what makes this show so different, and frankly, better than other children's shows of its time. We've already covered this episode on our podcast, so if you want our long-form thoughts on it, check out episode 140 of Elwood City Limits from December 2021. Nearly 12 years after its original air date, The Great MacGrady aired again as part of Season 24, in the show's only complete remake of a previous episode. This isn't a remix with different ideas or a different approach. This is the exact same episode, just done again. Now, there are one or two key changes that are worth talking about, but for all intents and purposes, the idea of the remake is to make this new version of the episode the one that people seek out. We'll talk about why later in this video. The existence of this remake has made things a little challenging to cover for our podcast. When we talked about the original version of the episode, I did a skim through of this newer one, and I found that, aside from one or two factors, it's basically the exact same. The problem was, how do we talk about the same episode again on the podcast and have it be both interesting and iterative enough to be worth our time and your time? Frankly, I don't think we can. At least, not in podcast form. I had the idea earlier this year to cover the episode in video form, both to do the due diligence that some of our listeners want from us, and to challenge myself to see if I could do it effectively. You can make up your own mind as to if I did that second thing, but here's how this is going to go. I've rewatched both episodes of The Great MacGrady, and I'll take you through the changes between both versions. I want to take a moment to thank everyone at the Arthur Wiki for their comprehensive breakdown of the changes, which you can read at the link in the description. Now, of course, the immediate and most notable change between versions of the episode is the animation style. Season 12 of Arthur was part of a pack of seasons that were animated by Animation Services HK Limited. After parting ways with its original animation studio, ACOM, out of South Korea, Arthur's production company Cookie Jar Entertainment began an agreement with Animation Services HK, a studio based in Hong Kong that worked on other shows like The Berenstain Bears and The Fairly OddParents. Seasons 12 to 15, in a sense, are a bridge between the traditionally animated older seasons of Arthur and the newer seasons that embraced digital animation programs. They still move like the older seasons of Arthur, but they also have a brighter sheen over them, a technically enhanced version of the animation that originally brought the show to the dance. Season 24 is animated in Toon Boom Harmony, one of the leading animation computer programs today, used on everything from cartoon shows like Arthur to Disney movies and more. Arthur began using this program in Season 20 in 2016, and the final 6 seasons of the show, as well as its newer online content today, use this same style. If you have kids in your life, this is likely the version of Arthur that they are used to watching. Now, there's one major change to discuss, and it's the whole reason why the remake exists at all. In the original version of The Great MacGrady, the special guest of the episode was, champion cyclist Lance Armstrong. This was notable because at the time, Armstrong was a highly regarded athlete in competitive cycling, and part of his story was that he was a survivor of testicular cancer. After overcoming cancer, Armstrong went on to win 7 Tour de France titles. He became an incredibly popular, successful, and respected athlete in his field. In fact, Lance Armstrong had also appeared previously on Arthur in the episode called Room to Ride. So this was a rare second appearance from a celebrity guest, if you don't count the parody version of him, Vance Legstrong. In the original version of The Great MacGrady, Francine gets in touch with Armstrong at the suggestion of Binky, who was the subject of the Room to Ride episode. Throughout the episode, Francine has a hard time accepting Mrs. McGrady's cancer diagnosis, but in meeting with Lance Armstrong, she gets the idea to hold a bike race to raise money for cancer research and eventually finds closure with Mrs. McGrady. Armstrong's involvement is natural, given his personal history with cancer, his charitable donations to cancer research, and even his history with the show. In between 2009 and 2021, however, Lance Armstrong's career underwent a drastic change. It was revealed in 2012 by the United States Anti-Doping Agency that Armstrong had not only used performance-enhancing drugs, but had been using and trafficking them for most of his career. Although he initially denied it, he later would openly admit to the allegations. As such, he was banned for life from competitive cycling, and many of his awards and distinctions, including his Tour de France titles, were stripped of him. The tale of Lance Armstrong is one of a significant fall from grace, going from a household name to virtually forgotten today. Due to this considerable controversy, the Arthur creative team decided to remake the episode featuring him, replacing his involvement in the story with one of the show's very minor characters, professional wrestler Uncle Slam. Before this episode, Uncle Slam, who has also been known as Slam Wilson, was only seen as a background character, usually when Binky is watching professional wrestling on television. His on-screen character is meant to be evocative of patriotic American professional wrestling characters, especially Hulk Hogan from the 1980s. Slam is inserted into the episode as a whole cloth replacement for Armstrong. In fact, Francine still ends up holding a Pedal for the Cure bike race, despite Uncle Slam not being a cyclist. You can essentially swap the name Uncle Slam for Lance Armstrong and Wrestling for Cycling to get a scope of the changes. Some minor scripting changes are made to accommodate this, such as Francine and Uncle Slam talking while walking through the park instead of biking. Of course, being that this was made during the show's final production cycle, a couple of the voice roles are different than in the 2009 version of the episode, like Arthur and DW's voice actors, who are among the most frequently recast voices on the show due to usually being voiced by children who then eventually age out of the role.
Ugh, this tastes like cough syrup. How come I keep getting the gooey ones?
DW, watch out! Ugh, this tastes like cough syrup. How come I keep getting the gooey ones? DW, watch out!
Aside from these, most changes in the episode are pretty minor. There are changes to the score due to the revamped production, and the scene introducing Uncle Slam involves Francine's father, Oliver, instead of her sister, Catherine. And there you go. Those are the differences between both versions of The Great MacGrady. I want to thank you for checking out the video, and again, if you want our full thoughts on the original episode, check out our podcast episode from December 2021, where we go into much greater depth. Again, the point with this video is that despite the cosmetic and character differences, these two episodes are the same. It's fun to look at the little differences between each of them and why this remake exists at all. But beyond that, if you've been listening to Elwood City Limits, we've been here before. Thank you so much for watching this first and likely only video episode companion thing of Elwood City Limits. A massive thank you to everyone at the Arthur Wiki for cataloging the changes between versions and for being a primary research source for this video. Link to them in the description. Thank you also to Peebs, who is a friend of the podcast, a patron, and the best source of Arthur and PBS Kids show knowledge online. Follow him on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch at It's Peebs with 3 E's, and follow his YouTube channel linked in the description. We only have a few episodes of Arthur left to go now for Elwood City Limits, so if you haven't yet, make sure to catch up with us on the podcast and be with us for the end of Arthur. For Lucas Mancini, I'm Will Young, and we'll see you next time.